Business is all about people and those human interactions. How do you get the best out of your people? How do you build those teams? How do you make them enjoy what they do? How do you make that affect your bottom line? And how do you run a business that teaches some of the biggest businesses in the world how to do that and do it from here in Belfast? Well, let's find out today with Tony McGaharan of People Playbook. Hello and welcome to Trading Up, the business podcast from the Irish News, produced in association with EY and supported by Queen's Business School. And today I'm delighted that Tony McGaharan is with me of People Playbook. Tony, it is great to see you. And I just love the fact that what you're doing is working with some of the biggest names in the world, but dealing with them in really those just vital human relationships. So first of all, tell us some of the names of the companies that you're working with.
Jesus, is a chance to show off, isn't it? Very difficult. We work with folks like Google, L'Oreal, Squarespace, FIFA, Trustpilot, Flow. We've done some work with EY way back at the start. So yeah, a lot of multinationals. And I think what's been most fun is that they're from lots of different industries.
And you're doing it from here in Belfast, which is the great thing. And I think you've got a brilliant story to tell from where you've come from, your life experience, and how you're bringing that to bear today in the corporate world. And I suppose the first thing I'd say is that when I say corporate world there, what I think of in my head is stuffiness. I think business suits. I think layers of management. Corporate's almost in its own sense a kind of negative word. And yet you're all about sort of subverting that, bringing the human kind of spirit back into things, bringing the energy back into the room, and doing that in companies that maybe perhaps need a bit more of it injected.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're all human beings. And I think there's this myth that, just because you're attending a workshop or a training, it should be death by PowerPoint and you should sit there and just listen. When in fact, I think the way I've tried to approach it is having watched it done poorly for so many years and then done a little bit better. Even when I had a career at Google, I was living in Dublin, Singapore, London and working globally. I saw it done, a lot better. But even then, I still felt like there was an opportunity to take it to the next level. And I guess sort of our three main pillars, Jim, are like purposeful, practical, playful. And that third one is probably more about what you're speaking about. It's bringing a bit of the crack to learning and development for leaders and teams. And
yeah, I mean, that is the surprising thing. When I've got your website up here and I was looking at it earlier on when I look at a little bit about us, you tell everybody what it is you do, some of the companies that you've worked with, as I say, some of the names you've mentioned there. These are names that people recognize. Obviously, people know Google. They know names like Stripe, Rightmove, WhatsApp, Trustpilot. I mean, these are household names. But then when I look at, who are the people that you have working with you, I think that's so funny because you have playmakers. It's not, as I say, the language that you're using is different. Your staff, your people are playmakers, and you've got people that are anything, from, sort of media experts, design experts, to musicians and comedians listed here. So tell us what's going on there.
Are you on the right website?
I seem to be, yeah.
Well, no, I think language is important. And, one of my pet peeves is when someone reaches out to us or they talk about engaging with us for training. And I say training's for monkeys. And that's not what we do. We do development. We do experiences. That's the first thing in terms of language. I think it's really important. Slightly different. Again, we're talking about adults in education ultimately. And I think training is outdated. Also, I think speakers even, I don't want to speak at people. I want to facilitate. And when I think about the word facilitation, and my background is in sports and basketball specifically. I remember as a youngster learning about the concept of a playmaker on the basketball court, someone that makes other people better. And that is why I loved sort of taking some of that language in the term of playmaker and bringing that into our business. It's got play. It's got this connection to sport around playmakers. So that's fit really well. And yes, we've got a couple of great musicians from here. And we have a tremendous comedian from New Zealand based in the south of England. And we're expanding our team of playmakers. But look, it's a different way of doing things, Jim. And I think some of the companies you've mentioned have not only brought us in once, They've brought us in multiple times, which tells me kind of this approach of purposeful, practical, and playful learning can really stick.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. I mean, it's not all just, looks fun and all the rest of it, but there's a point to this. It improves the bottom line. But for businesses, that's what they want. They want something that improves things, improves their teams, and improves ultimately the bottom line over the longer term. And so there is a purpose to all of that. The fact is, you've got people that are based in and around the world, but you're running the show from here in Belfast, turning over now well in excess of £1 million, a substantial business. And I just want to kind of pick up on the origins of this and where it all began for you, Tony, because you mentioned the basketball, you mentioned the sport. So tell us about Tony McGaharan growing up, getting involved in sport and what it is you thought you wanted to do as a young lad, leaving education.
Yeah, well, I grew up in South Belfast, originally on the Lower Ormo Road, and then we moved to Stranmillis, which was somewhat night and day as a youngster. Early in my kind of school life, I realised obviously I love sport. I joined my basketball team at Lagan College, and then in my club, Queen's Basketball, and got involved in coaching young people while I was still a young person. And I could see kind of a track ahead of doing more of that type of work. Then I got involved in Peace Players International.
And of course, I met you at Peace Players because I got involved in the charity at a board level. So I was very much kind of turning up once in a while. But here was this young guy working with the kids, one of our core coaches. And I could see the kind of work you were doing there with young kids, learning to kind of play together, community relations work. And you obviously developed a few skills at that level as well.
Isn't it funny though, in careers, you look back and you can see, it's at the time you don't see it, but if you look back, you can draw a line between the things that have connected your experiences that have led you to this point, right? And for me, education, facilitation, sports coaching, they've all been a big part of my life. I originally was a teacher. I studied Stranmillis College. I thought I was going to do teaching and then realized I couldn't live the life by the bell. And I quickly opted out, joined Peace Players in a role that was more full-time in community development, peace building work with young people. And strangely ended up in Google, which was a strange jump for sure at the time.
Yeah, I mean, and it was good that you made a jump to something different, but obviously bringing some of the skills that you had there from Peace Players. And Peace Players does sort of cross-community work with kids, uses basketball as the tool, but it's very much about that facilitation, developing those conversations, helping them to grow, and there's a whole leadership program then for when they get older. But so you're going into Google then, their operations initially in Dublin, I think. What were you bringing from that kind of earlier work, that the sports background, the sort of development background? What were you bringing into the Google environment, do you think?
Well, I think at the time, first of all, I was really torn between the path that lay ahead, and I had two options to kind of go deeper into the nonprofit world, which I loved and I really enjoyed and I was so passionate about, or this opportunity came up to explore working with Google in a kind of graduate level role at the time in Dublin. And I'll never forget, Jim, because the recruiter who got my CV from a friend, it was a referral, they were like, wow, looks really interesting, has a bit of international experience. I'd lived in the States when I was 16. I'd coached basketball in Sweden when I was in university. I took a year out and did that. And they liked the teacher aspect. They liked the fact that I would know how to communicate and educate customers that were on, at the time, it was called Google AdWords. Who knows if it's still the same. But when I had the conversation, well, I actually tweaked my CV, I'll be honest. The recruiter was like, I don't see a lot of tech experience. I was like, give me that thing back. Added a bit about a website that I created for basketball community in Ireland called the Courtside Collective. So I tweaked the CV.
You see, you just pulled a bit of website development out of your back pocket. It seems,
Well, it was one of those things I didn't think, it was more of a hobby at the time, but actually I developed great skills from playing around with that website. But yeah, I put it into the CV and then I got an interview. And it was clear to me in the interview process that really what they were looking for these particular roles in supporting their customers was the ability to communicate, listen, understand, facilitate a conversation, all of which I'd been doing up to that point in my career, both in Peace Players and in teaching.
Yeah, and I didn't know about the year in Sweden, but it does show a certain kind of adventurous spirit to have gone and done that. So whereabouts were you based in Sweden? Just tell us about that for a
Well, I
second.
was in a place called Umeå, which I thought was Umea. Of course, that was until I learned the alphabet, the new alphabet in Sweden. But yeah, I did Erasmus out there, and I plugged into the local community and started volunteering as a coach. And I'll never forget, I was on my way to come home to finish my degree, and a couple of the board members said, "Wouldn't it be really interesting if you came back and coached the top level women's team in the top league in Sweden for our club?" And I thought, yeah, that would be unbelievable. I was 22 at the time, and I was like, heck yeah, that would be interesting. So I interviewed for the position, thinking there's no way, but right place, right time, and I think the right attitude. They saw something in me and they gave me a shot. So I had to go home sheepishly and I talked to my mum and say, "Mum, I'm not going to finish my degree yet." And she said, "You get your ass back here and you finish your degree." But the point was, I took a year out and I went to my university and said, "Look, I'm going to take a year out of my degree. I plan on coming back, but I have this opportunity." And so I hung around and coached in what's called the Damligan, which is the top women's basketball league in Sweden.
That's some experience. So this is the thing. There's no, and I suppose you find this a lot of people. Everybody thinks when they're at a certain point, people who've been successful, it's like, well, people want to know, how did you get there? What did you do to get there? And you sort of imagine that people might have some great plan where they can see it all mapped out. But generally people don't have that kind of plan, but they do things that they know are leading in a good direction and that they're enjoying that journey, and enjoying the journey, I think, is really important. So it's clear that you're enjoying the journey with these experiences, adding experiences. Not quite sure where it leads, but it's taking you in a certain way. Google might have seemed like a bit of a kind of step into a new environment, but within that, though, you moved into a role in Google, didn't you, where you were working then with other people, with helping them come into the company. Your kind of people skills came to the fore again. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, at the time, I took on this customer service role. It wasn't my dream role, Jim, I'm not going to lie, but the thought of doubling my salary and getting free food really appealed to me because at that...
Did not give you free food in Peace Players then?
No, they did not, but we went to doorsteps across the road in Lisburn Road now and again, which was a real treat. The opportunity to go to Google was one that was like, what would that be like? Let's experiment. So I went in with that mindset of like, we'll give it a year, see how it goes. When I got in there and started to navigate that environment, I realized that there were opportunities to do more of the work that was kind of closer to my heart and my skill set. And that led me to work in people development. It did require a small move to Asia, where I'd never been before in my life. So I interviewed for a job to join people development in APAC, the Asia Pacific region, moved to Singapore on a whim, and took on a role where I was responsible for all new hire onboarding in that Asia Pacific region, which included, Australia, New Zealand, as well as India, China, Japan. So it was a real expansive role with an amazing opportunity to connect with so many different cultures.
Yeah, and I think, again, what that tells me, and for instance, on the podcast, not so long ago, we had Lyle Waters, who was a senior executive in the Ford Motor Corporation, and he was advising students who were listening to our interview that always to have that kind of point of difference, always to be curious, and always to look for the opportunity. So even within a corporate environment, he was saying sometimes it's important to maybe swim against the tide to look for that new opportunity. He took a chance, for instance, when he jumped into the kind of finance division out of the kind of main kind of corporate kind of car making division, if you like. And then he took another chance, when he moved to the States, because he got that opportunity in the finance division, met somebody in the States who said, "Do you want to come and work for us over there?" The next thing he's at, Motor City, Detroit, working at the very heart of the corporation. So you're obviously in that. You could get lost in a huge corporation. And this is important for people who maybe, are working in those big corporations. You can get lost, but how do you sort of maintain your individuality, look for those new opportunities, and perhaps swim against the tide when you need to?
I think it's like everything, relationships, it sort of all feeds into one, right? So building relationships across the company for me was really important. And Google is an amazing place for that. You bump into people in the coffee line, in the lunch line, and there was opportunities to try new things whilst maintaining kind of a core job. So that gave me opportunities to try lots of different things. And I had an appetite for that. This was all an experiment. I was surprised I didn't leave or they didn't sack me and I headed back to the nonprofit world. But as I say, it was clear to me that, I had something to offer the world of people development. I said yes to opportunities. And yes, like Lyle, I think you have to be curious. And I think we're in a position now in today's job market where, if you're a specialist in something, amazing, and go deep for sure. But there are lots of these specialists who are now in trouble due to the sort of improvement in AI. And I think being a generalist, being a creative thinker, being an emergent strategist, and someone who can apply themselves in different fields, industries, geos, I think has really helped me personally, and it's been really enjoyable. And it's really helped position People Playbook in the marketplace.
Yeah. And it's funny, I saw a headline the other day that one of the senior executives at Anthropic saying that the humanities degrees are going to be very important in the future. So everybody thought that those are the ones that are going to go. Everybody needs to do STEM. But if you look at AI, it's replacing a lot of kind of technical jobs quite quickly. But having a kind of much broader skill set doesn't mean you shouldn't understand the sciences. And if you can, great. But if you can sort of combine the two, you're in a perfect position. So broad experience, but also some depth where you can manage it.
Yeah, I think if you're an expert and you can communicate and you can work with people, oftentimes, again, a lot of our work is with teams and leaders, and we're spending a lot of time focused on what is traditionally known as quote unquote soft skills. Those are no longer soft skills. Those are absolutely core professional skills. Your ability to interact, deal with conflict, give hard feedback conversations. That is what I think separates those individuals that are specialists and experts versus those that have a level of expertise and then can also almost mobilize that in a really effective way when working with other human beings.
Yeah, I mean, those human skills, again, I'll refer back to Lyle's interview where he talked about an exchange he had when he moved from Detroit to run or take charge of the finances at a Ford truck plant in Minnesota. And on his first weekend, as the first foreigner to have such a senior job in the plant, he just went for lunch, Sunday lunch in a pub, and he encounters a load of people that look a bit like Ford workers. Anyway, he gets chatting to them. How's things, guys? What are you up to? And they tell him, oh, we're having a great old time here. We're supposed to be on shift, but it's Sunday, so we normally come down here, spend a few hours hanging out, having a nice lazy lunch. We'll head back later on and clock in before the shift is over. And then they said, and what do you do? And he said, well, I'm the new financial controller of the plant. Now, the thing is, he said that was provided a great opportunity for a reset on Monday morning. But you could tell by how he told the story with a smile and how he'd engaged with those guys that it wasn't, right, you're all sacked. Something that had sort of been allowed to drift. And in a sense, all mistakes are management mistakes. They're not down to the workers. So he had to find a way to reset without destroying the relationship that he needed to have with those workers from day one. And he clearly did that. And those are those are skills that need to be honed and developed, aren't they?
Massively. I mean, Lyle has an opportunity there to be the villain and to start off on the wrong foot with the people that are doing the work. And instead, it sounds like, Lyle was able to turn this into an opportunity for learning and to inform his leadership. And I think oftentimes when I'm working with leaders, I believe it's our job to create a psychologically safe environment, which is a fancy way of saying people can speak up, they can use their voice, they can be honest. And I think what we're seeing in especially with Gen Z and kind of current workplace culture trends is that the more people feel connected to the purpose, the more people feel they can be themselves in the workplace. I think we're getting more out of people that way. I think people are happier, healthier, more productive. And I think once we can sort of unlock that as leaders and create an environment like that, as we talked about earlier, as you mentioned, not only is it a better place to be, like your business is going to thrive, discretionary effort. So those folks are taking a couple hours off on a Sunday for a pub lunch, but are they also bought into the company in that when it's needed, are they going to stay a little bit later and put in the extra hours?
Yeah. What does he call that then?
Discretionary effort. So
discretionary
to what extent, Jim, at the end of your shift, are you willing to hang on and, help support that client who needs it? Or are you the person that says, oh, it's 6 o'clock, I actually am clocking off, so I'll pass this on to someone else? That's not an effective, for example, client-facing organization. So what you want is people that say, I get a lot from this experience, from this organization. I believe in my leader. I'm committed to the purpose of what we're doing. And I feel supported and valued. And so I'm willing to go the extra mile. That's all we're talking about. And I think the organizations that we work with that do that really well, it's very obvious. And if you look at both their stock price and their development and how things are going in their business.
Yeah. So I think I want to get into how those relationships have developed with those companies. But let's not jump too far ahead of ourselves. So you're in Google, you've gone to Asia, you're onboarding these people who are coming to work for Google. That's kind of helping them sort of get started, integrated into the company, but also presumably there are issues to do with, literally moving maybe to a new place, settling into a new city, how all of that works. So you're helping just kind of almost Tony, the kind of Google butler, are you? Helping them get organized? Or how does it work?
Yeah, that's a good Google butler. Yeah, let's not let that stick. You'll not see my LinkedIn updated with that. If you've seen the movie The Internship, there's a guy at the front that does the nuclear onboarding, and that would have been somewhat like me. But yes, I mean, how someone starts in a new organization can really impact their kind of discretionary effort, their willingness to stay, and their impact in the business. So having a really great first week where the hygiene factors are covered, you're able to find an apartment because you've moved city. You're able to plug into a community and find other people to connect with and actually socialize with. Your bank account was set up really well. And then you get into the company. Are you understanding how things are done, right? That's culture. And, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So my role was to create a program and execute a program that helped people quickly become effective in their role and feel safe and feel settled in their position. And it was such great fun. And it was hard to do it because across that APAC region, I think there were 20 plus offices. So someone could be joining Hong Kong. One person could be joining Hong Kong for day one of their new job. And then they would come to Singapore for a more of a regional onboarding program. So you had to make sure the person in Hong Kong got their laptop, Jim, and then when they came to Singapore, that really was the most fun for me because it was about connection building between fellow new hires as well as connecting to the mission of Google and the different organizations that they were going to work with.
Now, my guess is you were probably pretty good at your job, but at some point then you decide, I'm going to set up my own business. That's a bit of a jump.
Well, the last jump in the Google environment, so I was like 7 years there. I did 3 roles, 3 locations, whilst working in multiple global and regional teams. But the last jump actually was from Singapore was when I fell in love and then made a personal jump to come back west. My partner and I met in Singapore and we decided we want to be closer to family. So we moved to London. And at the time, it was really tough, Jim, because I was doing the work that I really enjoyed that thankfully, yes, I think I had some skill in. And then I took a different role. I became a recruiter in London working with Google. And the reason was it was a job opportunity that was enabling me to move back west. So I took that role on and I saw it as a learning opportunity to understand how to work closely with clients and understanding their needs. And that's what I saw my role as a recruiter or a staffing business partner. So I did that, first of all, in London, and that was a hard experience. Recruitment's a really tough job and it's very target driven and maybe not necessarily the people role that I was looking for, but I learned so much about targets, about measuring impact, about working with clients to really understand what they need to help advance their team. So that was a lot of fun before I started the business.
So then starting the business, you've gathered all of this experience. What is it that you distilled into that when you just said, right, I think I can run a business here. I think I can offer my services. What is it you felt that you could offer that was different? What has People Playbook done that's different? And did you find that you had that right from the start, or at least the core of it?
I would love to lie to you and say, listen, the roadmap was set. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I know you and your entrepreneur journey, you're figuring it out as you go along. And I think that's the most fun part, right? Starting on the right foot and then learning as you go. For me, honestly, I left London, wanted to come back to Belfast. That was the real driver. I wanted to be closer to my mom and to my family and to be home around community. And I thought to myself, what companies are interesting to me in Belfast? And the truth was there were none that I was super excited about. And I wasn't a specialist, Jim. So there weren't those very clear job postings in Belfast where I thought, I could do that job. I kind of had this sort of weird sort of mix of experiences that didn't really tie into, a very specific job. So I thought to myself, I would love to try and do this myself. And I had an experience when I was in London where I spoke and facilitated at a conference in Edinburgh. I was invited up there by a client. And they said, look, I can't do this. Would you do it? I said, oh my God, I'd love to. And I delivered a workshop up there at this kind of pharma conference, right? No experience in pharma, but it was all about innovation. And so I had this Google deck that was really very much the company's own content, but I facilitated it. Afterwards, I had about 4 or 5 people come up to me. It was a 2 or 3 hour workshop. There was 100 people in the room. 4 or 5 people come up, Jim, and they say to me, that was an amazing workshop. And I'm thinking, well, obviously it's great Google content, but each of those 5 people made reference to the way I facilitated. And that was the first time I thought, oh my goodness, there's a chance I might be able to do this by myself. And that was honestly the starting point when I was like, okay, let's see see if I can take this to market and try it out, really.
Yeah. And so shaping the kind of USP around that, how did that work, and how did you go and get your first client? Because that's always a big step.
Well, yeah, I think I had a mentor in Google who said, well, Tony, if you're going to start your own, but first of all, you're too young. That's the truth. They said, you're too young to leave. You have much more to learn. I think I was, how old was I? 32, 33. They were like, you're too young. You've more to learn. There's more to be gained from this Google experience. But I looked ahead, Jim, and I saw this linear path, and I was not really enthused, and it just didn't suit me. And they said, you need to pick a specific market, which I didn't. You need to focus on a specific problem, which I didn't. And so I really just wanted to work with organizations that wanted to do people development differently. They wanted to be more purposeful. They wanted to be more practical. They wanted to be more playful. And I have that language now. At the start, I just knew it almost intuitively, innately, that there's a better way of doing it. And I just wanted to get started. And then as I started, I was able to recognize actually there's a market for this. There's a desire for people to do kind of learning differently. And I suppose that's how it started.
So you were able to sort of hone, you instinctively, you knew what it was you were offering and what it is you wanted to do. But maybe that kind of sales deck, if you like, hadn't been fully developed at that point.
Oh, the sales deck still being developed 6 years on, because I love solving different problems. And I think anything related to leadership and team development, we just want to sink our teeth in. We are getting clear on a kind of a consistent offering, because we've seen now after 6 years, what are the kind of consistent challenges. And you asked me about kind of first client. As we were walking in the studio here, I was telling you, like, it was old basketball teammates from Belfast. It was random connections I've made in my career. One of my favorite stories was I got a reach out from someone on LinkedIn who I had interviewed with when they were the manager for a role in Uber. And this guy, Jason, had worked in Uber. I'd interviewed when I was in Singapore. I was exploring different opportunities. And here we are, probably 4 years later. We've not really been in touch, but he's noticed on my LinkedIn that I've updated my employment to People Playbook, and here's what I'm doing. And I'd be pretty consistent at letting people know what I was doing. And he reached out and said, I remember interviewing you. You were excellent. I'd love you to come and work with us at Squarespace and help our managers develop. And that was, I was blown away. It was really, it was just such a great moment to know that those relationships mattered. What I was doing in social media and presenting myself seemed to appeal to someone. And that, me being in Belfast, and we talked about this, wasn't an inhibitor. Actually, it turned out that they were really, it was appealing to them, actually.
Yeah. And the next thing you've got to work out, though, is what do you charge for this? What are you worth? And we're terrible, I think, in this part of the world in undercharging, probably, because if you're dealing with companies at that level, you are bringing value to them. You've got to believe in what it is you're doing. So you've got to be willing to price that correctly to make sure that you can run a business from here and it isn't just always hand to mouth. But do you remember sort of kind of sweating a little bit when you sort of first suggested the invoice or whatever?
It's the hardest thing, Jim, and it's the bit that I'm quick to offer advice and help on when I speak to entrepreneurs who are in similar spaces and they're thinking about pricing. Because as you said, it's not something we grew up with here. Like we grew up, my mum didn't work a lot. She was a childminder and she did night shift in taxi companies before there were apps. I wasn't around sort of entrepreneurs or business-minded folks or people that knew how to value their work. So this was really foreign to me. When I started, I was absolutely winging it in that I just wanted to get a few quid for the work that I was doing. I was doing 3-hour workshops for $200. our pricing now would not reflect that, right?
Yeah, if you're doing a big, let's say you're doing I don't know, a big session for a big corporate these days, what sort of a check are you expecting them to write if you're doing like some package for them?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. We try to go with value-based pricing, which
Yeah.
I would recommend, right? A lot of people start off when they trade money for time, but that's not what clients are buying. They're buying an output and they're buying an experience. And a lot of times in my field, people are shopping for output, and they realize then actually the experience really matters too. And that's where your musicians, your comedians, and our approach to learning design really sets us apart versus others. So it depends. If we're doing an event, we did an event in Spain recently, 300 people, that's a huge event. It's 300 leaders being part of that. So that's 6 figures minimum for a half day or a full day. Equally, if I'm doing something more locally in Belfast, it's a different price point. But certainly, it's gone from, $200 for me at the start to, if you want to engage our team, really a minimum engagement can be anywhere from $8,000 for a couple of hours. And that's a very kind of entry point price. But because we put so much care and time and we throw the best people into the events, I mean, their experiences, Jim, in that Spain event, we came up with a whole Formula One theme. It connected to this company's strategy for the year. We had them build Lego cars and race them, and then we had a finale where we built a track for F1 at the end of it, and all the while we're having multiple kind of plenaries breaking out. We're having expert hosting and facilitation with brilliant playmakers from across the world. So it's a real range, and that's probably our biggest pain point is pricing it the right way. And I think oftentimes organizations, clients, they hold the price data. And that's why I like to speak more openly about that with our team and with others, because I think the more smaller businesses like ours can learn from one another in terms of pricing, I think we'll all be in a better place.
Yeah, and I suppose it's all, at the end of the day, it's what they want to get out of it. So you've got to sort of set the price to the side. What's the value? And then suggest the appropriate price subject to their budgets and so on, and what it is they want to do. And I think then coming back to this idea of doing it from here, which is perhaps where this is different. So companies here might be used to hiring in consultants or whatever from elsewhere. It always seems to be the kind of thing. But if you're running stuff from here, it's like, ooh, do we want to keep some kind of service office going in London or somewhere else so we can put that on our letterhead? This kind of approach, because we don't really want to tell people that we're from Belfast, because, Belfast isn't known as the centre of the universe for perhaps this type of work. So tell us about your thinking in relation to that and how that's shifted.
Well, there was a great poster in the Guinness storehouse that I saw when I was down in Dublin many years ago, and it had a kind of Guinness marketing campaign, and it said, "Born in Ireland, adored worldwide." And I feel like People Playbook's somewhat similar in that, yes, we have a presence here. This is our HQ. We've got a couple of people in Belfast. We have someone in Dublin, and we have someone in just outside Boston in Massachusetts, right now. So we've got kind of 4 full-timers. The way our business is growing and shaped is that, and I'm embarrassed to say this now, especially for folks that are listening from Belfast, I didn't want anyone to know I was from Belfast. I wanted them to see People Playbook and put us in the same category, yes, as another London, New York, Sydney, Hong Kong agency or consultancy. I was really terrified that being in Belfast would be a disadvantage in the market. So I hid it. I didn't tell anyone. And I intentionally kept off any sort of labels of where we were based. Now, part of that was me being concerned about being pigeonholed as kind of a small enterprise and not being able to work globally. What we've done is we've obviously expanded, and we've invited playmakers to join us from across the world, from Berlin, Amsterdam, Vegas, DC, Poland. It doesn't really matter now. We are a global business, but it's just been a real journey. I'm glad to say now that years later, it's become a competitive advantage to be in Belfast. You stand out more.
Really? A competitive advantage to be in Belfast?
Yes, because you can get lost in the sea of other kind of L&D organizations in London or in New York. But when you meet People Playbook, you discover a little bit about our identity and about where we're coming from. and possibly some of the cultural influences in how we approach the work, you don't forget us. You remember, oh, that person from Belfast that I met, or that organization I work with from Ireland. It really, as I say, it sticks out in the brain versus the 10 other in Mayfair.
Yeah. Hi. Listen, I'm just interrupting for a quick minute to thank you for being part of the Trading Up community. It's really appreciated. I think we're building a real community of business and entrepreneurship learning. So remember to hit follow or subscribe. It makes a big difference. And please drop me an email on tradinguppodcast@gmail.com. And while I have you, just a quick word about our sponsors, EY. EY is a global leader in assurance, tax, consulting, strategy and transactions, helping clients solve their toughest challenges and seize their biggest opportunities. With teams in 150 countries, EY combines global insight with deep local knowledge to help organisations transform and grow with confidence. Thanks again, and now back to the podcast. Yeah, and people, we always say people buy from people, but people can relate to other people. The story, your origin story, the business's origin story, its kind of roots are important. Part of its authentic story that people then kind of can, I suppose, warm to.
Yeah, they do. And I think, look, we're from a nation of storytellers and people that really value relationships, and that very much is infused in our business and human connection. It's not inauthentic. We didn't decide to do it because, we can make more money or there's a gap in the market. It's because that's how I want to work. And that's what I learned from my mother and from, going to school in Lang College and growing up in Belfast. And we're very people oriented here. And I think that has become so part of our DNA that what has happened by proxy, which is so fun, is that others across the world that share similar values have been attracted to us, both from the playmaker side of wanting to work with us and the client side. They really connect with the values that I think, certainly for me and my origins, already come from my experience growing up in Belfast, but apply globally. And that's probably been one of the coolest things, to see the business grow, maintain its identity, and not only that, sort of attract the right people.
And I want to talk about that sort of combination of sports experience and what you're doing and how you've applied that to People Playbook and how you apply that then to, developing people in organisations. So let's just talk about sport for a second. You love basketball. You've played it at a high level. You've coached the Swedish women's team now, we know.
Better coach than I was a player. My brother is he represented Ireland, captain Ireland, but yes, I played at a reasonable level.
So you're good on the court, but you're sort of almost better on the sidelines. Is that what you're telling me?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. But basketball is a fast moving sport. Lots of but very much one of those ones where I suppose there's lots going on. So therefore lots to analyse as well. So what do you think it is about that sport thing that you're bringing into business?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think one of the things I have to make clear for someone listening, because sport, albeit I think everyone can find a sport that they love, and I think everyone can connect with a sport they love. They might just not know that yet. They might not have found their sport. It's a bit like music, right? Everyone loves music. It just depends on the genre. However, when we do work with organizations, teams, leaders across the world, if we went in with a fully kind of, this is our sports business and we're going to teach you things through sport, it would be quite polarizing. You would have people really turned off and say, well, it's inaccessible, for example. We've got to be thoughtful about kind of the different abilities, needs, wants in an organization. So that's an important kind of caveat. So
yeah, I think it is important because a lot of people, perhaps it's a sport they like and therefore they can use it for all sorts of kind of analogies and metaphors. Let's say you're a mad football fan and you keep throwing those in as some leader in a business, but half your team never watch football. You're going to get pretty sick of it.
It's like a scene from The Office almost, It's like, it would be incredibly upsetting. And it's happened with me, and I've learned that the hard way, Jim, where I've been in a room and I've made a reference to and like in sport when da-da-da-da-da, if you can't connect with that, then I'm not doing my job. So my job is to serve as many of the people in front of me in the best possible way. Doesn't always happen. That's the risk of this work. It's very challenging. It's nuanced because people are complex and you're trying to cater for lots of different needs. But where possible, we try to have an inclusive approach to learn and design and facilitation. That said, I love sport. We've called our facilitators playmakers. intentionally because it's somewhat open. You don't have to be a sports person to know that. You hear play, you think, all right, that's interesting. You might not even know it's relevant to basketball. Where it's really helpful in my thinking is that when I was coaching under 12 girls for the first time when I was 16 years old, I understood how to effectively coach and teach by teaching 11-year-olds how to shoot the basketball. I understood how to set up a large group of people to do something in a way that was smooth and frictionless and learn a new skill and develop. I understood what it meant to be a great teammate. I understood what it meant to be an effective leader and influence the people around you. So I learned all those skills. So although it isn't always very explicitly connected to my experience in sport, there's absolute connection. I'll give you an example. In basketball, the reason I think it's the greatest sport in the world is that basketball requires diversity. And I think organizations are the same. In basketball, you have 5 positions and you have a point guard, typically a smaller player, not always, but typically a smaller player. It is changing, but smaller player, good with the ball, can move fast, can make good decisions and so on. You also have on the other side of the court, you'll have a center position. This is again, this is your Shaquille O'Neals, this is your 7-footers, these are your big players who maybe are a little bit more immobile, but they're very strong, they're big, they're good at positioning in the post close to the basket. The concept of basketball for me is when you have a diverse range of skill sets working together to achieve an outcome, you're going to be successful. I believe in organizations, it's the same thing. If you have a diverse range of people that can do lots of different things but complement one another, work towards that shared kind of purpose and outcome, you're going to win in business. And I think that's the beauty of kind of the sport business parallel.
And going back to, say, coaching, say, kids playing basketball or any other sport, I've never done it myself. And I admire those that do give up their time to do things like that because, it is a public good and it's great to see. But to actually see somebody do it well, or to have somebody who's analysed it and has done it over a time and then has been able to say, yeah, I managed to achieve that there. It's a bit like watching a conductor in an orchestra. I mean, what are they actually doing? Well, they're clearly doing something. So what has it been like, that those kind of learnings of, you've got this, like, you get a bunch of kids together, they don't even know which direction to run in, but then suddenly you've got them to a stage where you can see that starting to come together as a team. What's that like? What do you feel like doing that?
Look, one of the kids I coached when she was 11 is now playing for Ireland, 5-6 years later at underage. It's awesome. The best part, Jim, is that they continue to love the sport and love playing with their teammates. Like, that's so cool. Again, similar in organizations. If I work with a leader or a team that is having friction or it's not going so well, or they're, not learning to evolve in how they work together, and then years later I hear from them and they say, wow, you remember that thing we installed with you and we tried out? We're still doing it and it's working well. It's amazing. I think for the basketball coaching, especially kids, it's a tough, I've been a coach for a long time with kids, and I've done summer camps in the US. I did 3 summers there and ran basketball and athletic programs for a whole camp of like 300 kids. So I've seen it all levels. But what it boils down to is your ability to keep attention, encourage curiosity, and organize them into a way that they can learn and develop new skills. That's exactly what we do in People Playbook. How many workshops have you been to, Jim, or conferences where you leave and you go, waste of time, bored the life out of me, and didn't learn anything?
Quite a lot. And I think one of the problem is that people think, I think part of the problem is that you go to these things that maybe have been run on a certain formula. And they think it's just a question of one speaker, PowerPoint presentation, then a couple of other speakers, and then you have to have the politician speak, and then you have to have the sponsor speak, and then you have some, pretty awful kind of chicken gooch on overheated lunch, and, before you can escape. And, that's a whole day or a half day gone. And sometimes I'm not paying for it because I might actually be involved. But if I was paying for it, I'd be really annoyed,
I know. It's brutal. And it doesn't have to be this way. One of our playmakers, Dr. Kim Howell, she's in Vegas, originally from Georgia. She's a brilliant professional in this space. She's a tattoo on her wrist, I think, that says, "Be here now." being present is the first step, right? When you have a speaker, a facilitator, and you really like a good concert or a good comic, and you see someone on stage and they're in the moment, that you know they're present and they're not just regurgitating a YouTube clip or what could just be you watching a YouTube video, and you feel like they're in the room. It's amazing, and I think there's little tweaks that can really help. I've had to give feedback to some of our playmakers before because I've been at workshops for like 2-3 hours and they're delivering and I'm watching and I'm observing. And my job in the organization now is more of a coaching role rather than necessarily delivering and facilitating the work. We've got about 20 facilitators that are working across the globe at any one time with different clients. So when I get a chance to see them in action, it's amazing because I can give real-time feedback and help them develop because I know they want to do their best work. I had one playmaker who went 2-3 hours and didn't mention the organization that they were working with. And there was about 30 leaders. Didn't say the company's name, Jim. I find that to be disrespectful. I mean, I'm really, it annoys me because I think, why not make this personal? We're here in the room. Don't just rhyme off the same old stuff. Be in the room, speak to them, the people in front of you, use their name, use relevant scenarios that connect with them. If it's a sales team, don't talk about engineering. Really connect with what they're here to learn and make sure the gap between what they expect to get and what you're delivering is so thin. I mean, that is absolutely key. And when it doesn't happen, it grinds my gears and we're going to lose business if we don't do that. Thankfully, this doesn't happen very often. And in fact, we're so purposeful in our design, in the language, the visuals, the activities, the teaching, the way we engage with our clients that they know that like nobody will care more than us about this project. And I tell the team all the time, like, if effort and attitude, this is kind of a sports thing. That's the two controllables. You can control your effort, you control your attitude. If you put the effort in and you have a real positive attitude, you're going to be a great person to work with and it's going to result in a better output. So the Jim's not at a conference going, it's clear the speaker didn't care about me or the facilitator. It's clear, they were here for them and not me. I want you to have the opposite experience. I want you to go, wow, I felt seen and heard, felt this was relevant. They really understood who was in the room. They've given me value and now I'm leaving and I've enjoyed it and I've enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose not to go on too much, as you say, you don't want to over labor the kind of the sports connections or the basketball. But I do think basketball, as a sport, it's high energy. It has that kind of positivity attached to it, the high fives and all of that. When I think about soccer, for instance, I think about people talk about, let's say, Alex Ferguson and the hairdryer, when he would sort of go off one of the players and they'd sit there with being blasted, at halftime. A different way, perhaps, of managing and of coaching. So maybe the basketball fits with this kind of more positive, getting the best out of people approach. But also we're seeing now in business a kind of coming together of the learnings of business going into sport and the learnings of sport going into business in different ways. Companies from here, for instance, brilliant at tracking, say, sports metrics. We're seeing that going off the charts everywhere. We can think about, how everything in sport is analysed down to the nth degree. And then, perhaps how that has come maybe from a culture of business, but how then that kind of sports kind of analysis can be brought into business. Is there an element of that in what you're doing because you're clearly applying it even to your own business, taking a step back, looking at how you're delivering stuff and making sure that it's being done properly, making sure that it can be measured and that you can prove that it has a positive outcome for the people that you're working with?
Yeah, and that's something we've got a lot more focused on because, again, quote unquote soft skills, how can I measure whether you're a better teammate, a better leader? But you can. There are metrics that can connect to organizational goals and business outcomes, and we're working hard with our client to understand what they care about, making sure that that's what we're facilitating towards and that we're tracking, right? So that analysis is really important. The sports thing made me think of a couple aspects of how the crossover happens. Well, there was great research into this team that improved how the bench showed up for each other, and they were able to track that the more the bench was engaged in a game, supporting one another, high fives, they actually measured it. The team had a better win-loss column. So, there is research into this space. Secondly, Gallup, who do a lot of research into workplace cultures and what's going on, in companies, they again have come out and said, if you have a best friend at work, you're 7 times more engaged. If you're more engaged, you have better well-being, but you're also more productive. So again, analyzing these things, understanding how we design our work so that we help kind of collaborate and create better relationships with the leaders and the teams we work with in their organization. Because we leave, Jim, we're out the door. Our job is to get out of the way sometimes of those relationships. I think thirdly, I might have mentioned this to you before, we do a lot of work in executive communication, executive presence, communications coaching, communications workshop. When we do those, one of our brilliant playmakers, Tracy, she will often say to folks we're working with, and Tracy's brilliant. She's ex-Canadian Broadcast Corporation, has done a lot of work in PR and media training, and now does so much work with us and leaders in the executive presence space and executive communication. She'll have these leaders swap phones and say, right, well, let's practice communicating and record one another and really get into the video analysis. She's like, how can you get better at speaking to a group if you don't watch yourself? Again, take that from the world of sports, whether that's your golf swing and your Rory McIlroy or your Michael Phelps and you're a swimmer, video analysis, like we're not doing that too often, are we, Jim? How often are you kind of sitting down and watching yourself cringe and then go, oh, I'm not sure about my body position there or could have done a better job, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it's a lesson we could all take, whether we're doing this for a living or not. But yeah, so CEOs, get them to actually do that and try and improve. And, perhaps that's difficult for somebody who's in that senior position because they'll have kind of perhaps developed bad habits that other people haven't been willing to point out before.
I'm sure they won't. Who's going to go to the senior leader and say, that wasn't very inspiring, or you kind of tripped up on your words, you should work on that? No one, not unless they're inviting that or they're in an environment like one of our events where we're creating the conditions where it's safe, right? And we spend a lot of time creating the environment where there's an openness and willingness to be vulnerable, because it's hard to do things like that and watch yourself for sure. I think the other thing, Jim, I was talking about, like sports, results-based business, like you either win or you lose, right? There aren't really too many prizes for professional sports if for participating. It is outcome focused. And I think in our industry, it's difficult, but not impossible to really tie clear goals to a project that we're working on. I'm hoping I'm going to remember them correctly. The 3 C's. So clarity, competence, and confidence. Those are 3 things you can measure, right? Are you clear, right, on what it is you need to do? You have the knowledge now on how to enact a skill, whether that's giving effective feedback. Are you competent in doing it? Have you practiced it? Have you got feedback? Are you sure you're doing it the right way? And then are you confident in doing it? Do you feel good about going in and having that hard conversation that before you spent time with us, you were going in either winging it, not being reflective in your practice, or just doing it in the way that you want, but not thinking about how it might impact both the person you're giving that hard conversation to or you're having that hard conversation with, and then how that impacts the business. If you think about it, Jim, if you've had a bad boss in your career, which I'm sure you have, you don't have to name names. Like you don't, you don't want to, you don't want to work for them. You'll look elsewhere. And so again, on the bottom line, retaining some of your top talent is all part of this kind of developing better relationships.
Well, but one of the things I think, and I've seen you present and talk about things before, but is that sort of approach that people need to engage with others and realize that other people aren't automatically interested in them. It's not about you, in a sense. It's about them. So when you're approaching other people, be interested in them, develop that curiosity. And I think some people have it naturally, natural curiosity about life, about things around them, about other people that they meet. But others, and particularly when they get into a leadership position, can often have lost that. And they think it is all about them, and they want, because everybody's always following around after them, asking them how they are, what do they want, what's next for them. They don't have to consider the little people. But if an organization develops like that, that's going to end up, fairly toxic. So how do you turn that around? How do you get those people at those leadership positions to kind of, rethink how they engage with people who perhaps they see as below them, if you like, in the corporate, pecking order? Yeah.
It's positional authority, right, versus influence and without authority, right? So if you're in a position of power and influence, because you're the CEO or you're C-suite or you're a senior manager, yeah, you can go in and say, Jim, do the thing. and not care about how Jim feels or whether you want to do it or whether, you care deeply about the impact on your life, right? I think you can get away with that in organizations where people, and or a job market where people feel like they can't leave, right? But are you going to get that discretionary effort we talked about? Are they going to go above and beyond? Maybe not. I think
We certainly got clarity, though, if you just go in and say, do that. I mean, it has that advantage.
no, absolutely. And sometimes that's required. And sometimes it's required where I go in and if I'm leading you, Jim, I'm just going to come say, hey, Jim, I need you to do this thing right now and get it in. We have a deadline. It's really important. And that's fine. If it's consistently like that, or I'm giving you tasks that you're not equipped to do, either you don't have the confidence or the competence in, are you going to feel safe to say, I'm not confident in that, or can I ask a follow-up question? Then you're going to do a crappy job. You're either going to go off because you don't feel safe to ask me and say, look, can I clarify something? You go off and you do it and mistakes are made. I mean, Amy Edmondson's kind of the thought leader in the space of psych safety. She looked into like hospitals with nurses and doctors. In the hospitals where nurses felt more psychologically safe to speak up to consultants, to doctors, there were less mistakes registered. The data speaks for itself. That's amazing. I think that stuff is just, it speaks truth to power in that this is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the comparison again from another medical author, and it was about trying to get the culture of airplane safety into hospitals, because the no blame culture, yes, there are investigations, aggressive investigations, but if we think about it, the number of accidents in aviation are minuscule compared to the number of flights we have. But when there is an accident, it's properly investigated, but it's not a question of just your fault. They'll find out what went wrong, and it's not a question then of finding somebody to blame necessarily. So whereas hospitals, you end up perhaps with a cover-up culture because nobody wants to take responsibility and everybody's afraid of these godlike surgeons and consultants at the top.
So you need, that's where, that culture piece, you need from the very top of the organization to say, we care about our leaders being self-aware and acting in a certain way, right? And I tend to use the word principles rather than values. Values feels a little bit like personal and a bit possibly colonial of like, you need to behave and care about what we care about. Principles of how we work as a team, again, sports, really, really important. New Zealand All Blacks are very good about that, right? When it comes to doing this well, you need processes, you need mechanisms, you need rituals, right? There's a great quote, process saves us from the poverty of our intentions. I think most leaders want to do a good job. I think most leaders want the business to do well. They want their team to be happy and productive. Right? I think that's fair to say. I think most people are like that. Maybe not some of your former bosses, but most people are like that. And where leaders fall short and teams start to dissolve or not perform their best, or because they're not enjoying the work and they're not working well together, is because there's no process in place. So one of the things we would do regularly is something around a 360 where, a leader might say, I might say to you, Jim, if you're leading a team of 10 people, Jim, how's it going? That question is up to you to interpret. How's it going with your team? You might say, it's going great. And I'll say, well, how do we know, Jim? How do we know the team are happy? How do we know that the team feel like they have the tools to be successful in their roles? Oh, I just know, Tony. And that's when I call BS. And I'll say to leaders, well, look, if you really are serious about this, let's go and get the data. And typically we'll either survey or we'll focus group, but we have to build up some trust and rapport with the team to know that we're not giving names, it's anonymized, and we try and get some data. Ideally, I want to work with organizations that are happy to put their name to it, but it takes the right culture for that. Then if I gather 10 data points from 10 different individuals about whether they have the tools, whether they're happy, I can then work with you and say, well, Jim, let's look at the data. 1 to 10, how well do you think your team can access the tools they need to do their job really well? If you say, oh, they're a 9, Tony, we've just launched this new platform, everybody loves it. And I look at the data and people are a 3 or a 4 and they say this new platform sucks, then there's a disconnect, but in terms of your self-awareness and your understanding. And that again ties into this data piece. I'm really keen on making sure that when clients spend the money on us, because again, we're not the cheapest, that they can see tangible outputs from improving that. And then we would work on the intervention of how we close the gap.
And I mean, you said earlier on, I think that you're establishing these relationships with household names, some of these businesses, and you're getting repeat business. So that's a mark of success. Obviously, there's no point if you're only in once. Maybe it seems you'll suggest you've done something wrong. But anything you can tell us, any sort of feedback that you've ever got, whether it be from a senior leader or a particular company, that's made you think, gosh, this is a far cry from me teaching kids in Ardoyne or whatever
Yeah.
how to play basketball and get along with each other.
Like it's like in terms of blowing my mind in terms of impact. Yeah, I mean, there's one that comes to mind that it initially was getting goosebumps for all the wrong reasons. I was like, oh God, this is going terribly. We were working in New York City with a global leadership team of about 80 for Google Cloud's business, one of the Google Cloud businesses. And we'd done I think a day and a half conference, big deal, big ticket item. They don't mess around, right? In Google, especially in the cloud business, it's on the up. And there was great investment. We did so many different things with them. But I think initially in the build up to us joining, there was some hesitancy from some of the senior leaders as to why are we bringing these guys in? At the end of the day and a half, the VP got up and said, folks, I think this was great. And it was lovely to hear that he felt it was great. But one of the leaders put their hand up and took the mic. And they said, I just need to say one thing about, and looked down at the playbook and said, I just want to say about this People Playbook. I was really concerned when we decided to bring them in and spend this money. And I was at the back of the room in the tech deck going, oh God, no, this is disaster. We've spent all this money bringing people to New York. We've really put our heart and soul into the design, the delivery, and now we're about to get, the worst feedback live in front of everybody. And she said, I didn't get it, but now I do. And I thought, we're Google, we know what we're doing. But it's been amazing to see how People Playbook have been even more googly than us and have been able to kind of meet our needs and deliver this exceptional experience. And I think in that moment I went, that's amazing, because we've turned kind of non-believers to converts who've went, yeah, this was useful in bringing in a partner. And that's the sweet spot.
Absolutely. And that gives you the confidence, not that you were suffering from a lack of, but it seems to keep going out and selling it. But, so again, rewinding back to the guy that was, going through Stranmillis, thought he might have been, taking a good job as a teacher, which is a respectable job. And harder job than what I've got. So shout out to the teachers. But, that was it. Or maybe then you said, I don't like the Bell thing, so maybe I'll work in a non-profit. I'll do this kind of community work, which is, rewarding in its own way, but certainly not financially rewarding. Mm-hmm. But now you look at running a team of kind of 25 odd people around the world, literally internationally based, working with some of the biggest names in the world, bringing not just your team, but your experience, your knowledge, something new into these companies, from Google down to others. And then you look at, the financials, which are important to sustain all of this. And you're turning over maybe, 1.5 million or close to that a year at the moment. And no doubt more to come. What do you think of that journey? And do you ever think, gosh, life's a bit strange? Yeah. Yeah, we were chatting again before we hit record about the turnover, and I think when we hit 1 million in a year, I think it was last year or the year before, and David, my business partner, said, do you want to know about finances? I tend not to look. I tend to be in the moment kind of person, and whilst also keeping an eye on the future. And I remember he said to me, we've hit 1 million. I think it was like October, maybe November, sort of the back end of our financial year. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, we've hit £1 million. And I was like, that's crazy. I mean, I cried, I'll be honest. I cried. My mother passed away a couple of years ago, and I would have loved to have told her. She would have had a chuckle and been blown away. And I would have loved to have heard her response. But because it's crazy to me, I mean, I was so happy making 18,000 a year in my first nonprofit job. And so to get to that sort of turnover, what was really funny about that story, Jim, was that then I said, there's no way. And he got out the figures. He's like, you're right, I'm wrong. And I was like, oh, good, because that was a huge milestone. You've knocked me off my seat here. And he said, it's actually 1.14 million. I was like, that's crazy. So that's been amazing. But look, the revenue is a signal of kind of what's happening, which is we're being invited back. Clients are trusting us. When we've had a couple of clients who have moved organizations,
and then went, oh, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to get you in. It just speaks to the trust they have in us to make them look good, to work with their teams, to make their life easier, which is amazing. So that's on the client side. And I get really lit up when a client feels like they got more value than they paid. And that's the goal, that they leave and they go, it cost us 300 grand, but I feel like we got a million's worth, right? With our playmakers, it's amazing because we had this free webinar yesterday, and it was about learning transfer models and how you can measure the impact of your work. One of our playmakers, Lucy, ran it, and she sent me a message after, and she said, this community of playmakers, these freelancers that you've built is amazing. I just got messages from 5 of them who were in attendance at this webinar about how great it was and how useful it was. And I just think that's so special. So we're working with these freelancers across the world who are getting to do work that they love and enjoy the experience, right? We practice what we preach, hopefully, and we've got a really great team. We actually bring them to Ireland every year. We take them to a spa like Calevi or Galgorm, and we all hang out for a couple of days and we do some development.
Sounds tough.
It's a tough gig. So that's on the playmakers. And then I think thirdly, for the full-timers, I'm working with our creative director, Adam, who I've known since he was 14. He's in Dublin. He's an amazing designer. He designed Basketball Ireland's new logo. He is just a brilliant creative mind. He was able to afford his house and his wedding because we're able to have success and be able to continually increase his salary and bonus him. Shannon, who is about to join us as our 4th, is a good friend of mine also from Google. She's an experienced professional, just a high bar for excellence. And then I work with David, my business partner, which again, I know there's talk of should you work with your partners, your friends, your family, and David I've known since I was 11, and he's from the different sides of the tracks here in Belfast, and we met in Lagan, and he has just been such a great friend and business partner. He's come in and he's taken some equity, and whenever they're all having a great time and they're saying they get this, we were 4-day-a-week company and spend more time with my family and I'm able to afford my new house, or I love the work that we do. It doesn't feel like a Monday morning slog. It just lights me up, and I don't take it for granted ever, Jim. And it's honestly, I always tell myself, oh, when this dies, what am I going to do? Because it can't last forever, it feels like.
Well, I think you're setting it on a good path that it could well last for a good bit to come. Yeah, totally. And of course, on your own, you've had a young baby recently, so you're dealing with fatherhood as well yourself, and the good lady who is part of the key reason why you're now back here as well. So lots of wonderful things to come on that front as well. Well, listen, I do love it. I love the story. I love let's just repurpose that Guinness phrase. Born in Belfast, adored around the world. That's the story. Tony McGaharan, many thanks indeed.
Thanks so much for having me on Trading Up. Big fan of the podcast, Jim. Keep it up.
Keep listening. Thanks.